I don't know if you know this gentleman. His name is Manmohan Singh. Hopefully I'm getting that right. And
Yeah,
he's
of
with,
course. Manmohan Singh. Yep.
yeah, he's with the IMF. I don't know if you know him
Yep.
personally or you know of him, but he's come out with a book. I believe it's called Money and Collateral. And he also has a working paper that he did with Peter Stella or Paul Stella.
Peter
Um,
Sell. I
is
know
it
Peter personally. I don't know
okay?
Muhammad Singh personally.
Okay, so I'm actually reading that paper, but he talks a lot about collateral, which is something that Snyder talks about all the time. But he takes it to uh, the next level. I mean, he takes it to 10 levels more extensive than even Snyder takes it. But what he talks about all the time is the moneyness, and that's the word he uses, the moneyness of treasuries compared to bank reserves. Now, most of the viewers know exactly who you are, but if they don't, Joseph used to work at the Fed, hence Fed guy, and he was on the New York Fed's trading desk. So he's got an intimate understanding of how the plumbing works. Now, Mr. Singh's argument there is the reason that treasuries might have even more moneyness than reserves is because there's more pipes going to entities that can use treasuries, and there's fewer pipes going to entities that can use bank reserves. You know,
He's absolutely right.
can you explain that a little bit further? Because I think that is crucially important to the next thing I want to talk about, or one of the things I wanted to talk about, which is this debt crisis, which is basically there's never going to be any more demand for treasuries relative to supply.
Yeah, so and Mahoman is the IMF's repo expert, and Peter, he retired from the IMF, but he retired, he's one of the senior people there as well, and they have a very good knowledge of this. So I think it's to understand this. I think it's helpful to think about the world through the lens of an institutional investor or someone who's really rich. Now, if you are, like most other, retail, if you have money, you put it in the bank. End of story. You don't have to worry about it anymore. The bank is where you keep your money. You feel like it's safe and liquid. But if you have a lot of money, say you are a billionaire or you manage $1 billion, you really can't think like that because you put $1 billion in the bank. Maybe it's Silicon Valley Bank, and you lose a lot of it. So
Exactly.
you have to think about credit risk in a different way. Now, in the global financial system, only the government is going to be credit risk free because the government has a printing press. It's not going to default. Now, when you're thinking about holding government liabilities, there's two things that you can think of as credit risk free. One, of course, is a liability of the Fed, that's a reserve. The other is a liability of the US government, that is a US Treasury security. Now, reserves are basically deposits at the Fed. So just like I can go and open a checking account at JP Morgan, so I'll have deposits at JP Morgan. So if you open an account at the Fed, then what you call the numbers in that account are reserves. But the thing is, very few entities have the privilege of opening an account at the Fed. Basically, you have to be a commercial bank. So when you're looking at credit risk-free things to hold, reserves are definitely one of them. It's just that most people don't have access to them because they don't have an account at the Fed. So the next best thing is a U.S. Treasury security. Now, because anyone can hold a U.S. Treasury security, it's widely available, and so it can move to more users, to more people. And so, in a sense, it can be more widely circulated as suggested.
Yeah, I think that's what people need to understand. Not that they have to agree or disagree with an argument, but when you hear the argument of quantitative easing, as an example, just being an asset swap, or when you hear maybe an extreme argument that I think Mr. Singh would make that quantitative easing is actually taking liquidity out of the system. To understand that, you have to realize that moneyness component of treasuries, uh, even relative to bank reserves. And thank you for explaining that.
Yeah, you're right. So quantitative easing at a high level, so the Fed goes and buys U.S. Treasuries. How does it pay for those purchases? It prints reserves. So on a high level, as we noted before, it's an asset swap. Um, Fed takes out treasuries and returns reserves in exchange. However, because reserves can only be held by those with a Fed account, in a sense, it could be construed, it can be interpreted to be reducing the amount of liquid safe assets in the
Right.
financial system.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so now let's kind of look at the plumbing through a little bit different angle, because I've had quite a few conversations on the mechanics of quantitative easing. Nobody knows it better than you do. And there's some confusion as to when the Fed is buying treasuries, how are they doing that? And who are they buying those treasuries from? Does the New York Fed's trading desk, can they choose who to buy them from, or are they just buying them from primary dealers who buy them on the open market? So then the bigger question is who is actually selling those treasuries? And as you've pointed out many times, and I've pointed out on this channel, that matters a lot, because if a bank is buying from a bank, then there's no impact on M2, and then we could have a further conversation about the aggregate balance sheet there. But if a bank is buying from a non-bank, then it's definitely going to impact M2, regardless of whether that bank is J.P. Morgan or the Federal Reserve.
So the way that the Fed operates is that it does its market operations always with primary dealers.
Right.
So, well, I'll take a step back and describe how the Treasury market structure works to begin with. The Treasury market structure is basically it's a dealer centered. So, for example, let's say that I'm selling an Apple stock. Well, what happens is that there are many different exchanges that where you can sell your stock. So you would say you would post on the exchange, I'm selling this much stock for this price, and someone else maybe would take the other side. It's different for the Treasury market, where when you want to sell something, what you would do if you are an investor is you would call up a securities dealer and you would say that, I want to sell this or I want to buy that. And they give you a quote, and you can call different dealers and they would all give you a quote. So it's done, over the counter. There's no exchange here. Okay,
Okay.
that's one thing. That's the
This is the
structure.
secondary market after the treasury has
Yeah,
been
yes,
issued by
that's
Janet
that's
Yellen.
right. That's
Okay.
right. Well, yeah. So when the Fed wants to, let's say, buy treasuries, what they do is they buy through primary dealers. They do all their market operations with the primary dealers. But I would think of the primary dealers more as a conduit, like a broker, rather than someone who's an end investor. Because at the end of the day, the primary dealer will buy from the Fed and then just sell to someone else, or vice versa, stuff like that. So they're just like a conduit. Okay, so let's say that the Fed wants to buy securities. The way that this is done is that it's done through something called reverse auction. So what the Fed would do is say, I'm thinking about buying this stuff. Come and make me an offer, and you have all the primary dealers go and make an offer. So the Fed then will take a look at these offers, and they have a very simple algorithm that calculates which of these offers are good or bad and so forth. And
Mm,
they'll take offers that are okay. So the way this is evaluated, one hand, where are treasuries trading at now? Okay, so it's relative to market, and it will also evaluate it relative to model. They'll have a model where they think, what is quote unquote fair value or something like that. So they basically go run through their very simple estimate as to whether or not this offer from the primary dealer is worth accepting, and if it is, they'll accept it. If it's not, they'll reject it. And so that's how they do it. It's trying their attempt to try to basically buy at market prices, or at least not get ripped off.
okay. Now, before we go any further, are the primary dealers that they are interacting with, are they banks or non-banks or both?
They're both. They're
Oh,
both.
that's what I thought. Okay, that's what I
So
thought. So
this is
then when the
how,
oh, go ahead.
yeah.
I was just gonna ask
So
you, so when those primary dealers are, effectively just flipping treasuries to the Fed, the question becomes, okay, where are they buying them?
yeah,
And if they're buying them from a non-bank, assuming that that primary dealer is under the umbrella of JP Morgan, then most likely that's going to have a positive impact on M2 money supply. If you're just looking at it strictly in terms of
Absolutely. You can see that
a
in the
nominal,
graphs really easy, right? You can look
yeah,
at M2 exploding higher in 2020, right?
right.
Fed is buying tremendous amounts of treasuries. M2 is going to the moon. For the most part, when the Fed is doing QE, it makes the M2 money supply go higher because the seller is usually a non-bank at the end of the day.
The seller of the treasury to the primary dealer that flips it to the Fed.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, great. That makes a lot of sense. So then I think the argument there would be, well, Joseph, my goodness gracious, if what the Fed is doing is at the end of the day increasing M2 money supply, then that means that there's more currency units that are out there chasing goods and services. Therefore, that's going to be an inflationary tailwind. And I think what you would say is, well, yes and no, because it goes back to our original conversation about it is true that M2 goes up, but the aggregate balance sheet hasn't gone up at all. And you're just trading M2 money supply at very low velocity for a treasury with zero velocity. So,
No, no, absolutely. I mean,
yeah,
we've done QE for decades, not just the US, but across the world, right? ECB, Japan, and so forth. And you don't really, they were praying for inflation for like a decade after the
yeah.
great financial crises and expanding the balance sheet and M2 significantly. And it just didn't really matter.